Hello everyone, so welcome. Today I'm going to do a bit of a talking head video, and this is in regards to TechDeal's RTX 3070 video where he asked the question whether the RTX 3070 was already obsolete. So I thought that was a pretty interesting take, and then not an Apple fan, he also wanted to give his thoughts on the situation because he also has a 3070 and a 3080, and he wanted to talk about that as well, and his video dropped today. And I thought I would also weigh in with my thoughts as well, just a bit of a talking head video, because I've also been doing some testing with the RTX 3070 recently, and people who follow my channel, they know that I've done a 3070 overclocking video where I just overclocked the memory, couldn't overclock the GPU core because the power limit was already set by the card. And I also did a video just a few days ago on the VRAM limit of the 3070 where I asked the question whether 8 gigabytes was enough. So if you haven't watched that video, that's a really good video to go and watch. I tested a lot of games and looked at the VRAM limits in all of them, the VRAM usage limits. And so if you haven't watched that, go and watch that video. But I will give the results at the end of this video when I give you my take on the RTX 3070. But let me talk about TechDeal's video first, and then I'll go and talk a little bit about not an Apple fan's rebuttal or arguments. And then I'm going to look at TechDeal's claims about Cyberpunk 2077, where he said that Cyberpunk 2077, if you're running an RTX 3070, you're already getting a poor frame rate. So let's talk about that as well. And then finally, I'll just give you my take on the RTX 3070 as somebody who's been using the card for like the last 3 or 4 months, and as somebody who also has an RTX 3090 and played with games on a 3090, and one of my thoughts between the 3070 and the 3090. Okay, so if you like this video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And we also have a Discord server, so come along, join us there. I'll leave a link in the description below. Let's talk about TechDeal's video first, and he was answering a question from a viewer. The viewer asked him, well, I have a 3440 by 1440p ultra wide, so what graphics card should I get? And TechDeal's answer was, well, it depends. And he likes to give that answer a lot, but I agree with him because it depends on so many factors. And it also depends on how much people want to spend. So you could still make do with a 1440p with even like a GTX 1070, depending on what games you want to play. So most of the time, I think the answer that he gives is like, well, it depends on what games you want to play. Although I will say with a graphics card, if you're going to play AAA games, if you're asking about AAA games, you probably want to pick the graphics card based on the monitor resolution and the performance that you want to get. So if your monitor is 60 Hertz, then you probably want to pick something that you can go around 60 FPS. But if you have something that's higher, like 144 Hertz, well, maybe you want to pick a bit of a stronger GPU. So I think that's probably a easy rule of thumb to use when you go and pick your graphics card. But then he also brought on the argument of, okay, well, what about future games? Because we already have a game, Cyberpunk 2077, which already has pretty average performance and needs a pretty strong graphics card. And he gave the example, I think he previously had a 2070 Super, and then he put a 3070 in, and he said the 3070 at 1440p with medium details and with DLSS on, he was only getting 45 FPS. So is that what you want? If you're going to spend like $1,000 on your PC, you spend $500 on your monitor, is that what you want to do, like skimp out on the graphics card?
I'm going to upgrade to an RTX 3070. Which leads us to the title of this video. At 1440p, you don't really need more than a 3070, right?
Ultra wide.
Yeah, well, there's that. Medium detail. Medium.
On non-ultra wide.
Medium detail. DLSS on. 45 frames per second on a 3070. Average.
Is that on your ultra wide?
Yes.
That's on your ultra 45.
But let's talk about not an Apple fan's reaction, and he was responding to that. So he basically said, these graphics cards are so expensive, even at their peak, but even now, they're really expensive. So is it really worth it to get that extra bit of performance for X amount of money? So with the 3070 to the 3090, you're getting maybe like 30% extra performance, but how much more are you actually paying for that? You might be paying $1,000. So the 3070 might be $1,000 at the moment, and the 3090 is like $2,000. You're gonna be paying $1,000, and is that really worth it? Especially like if you're trying to game at 60 FPS. If your example is Cyberpunk 2077, and you're already gaming at 60 FPS, how much is that 30% going to give you? It might give you like 75 FPS. Is that really worth it for like $1,000? All right, let's go to Cyberpunk 2077. And the first thing I did was to run this at 1440p Ultra with no ray tracing. And as you can see there, it's averaging about 55 to 60 FPS. So it's perfectly playable, especially if you have a G-Sync monitor. If you want, you could probably just lower a few other settings to get it above 60. But aside from that, you can run this easily on a 3070 if you're not using ray tracing. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, but I bought an RTX card just to use ray tracing. I wanted to see what it looks like. And Cyberpunk 2077 was this big, overhyped and marketed game. I wanted to see what that was like. And you can go and check out my ray tracing video and check out the differences between ray tracing off and ray tracing on and see if it's really worth it for the performance drop. I think most people are going to take the amount of performance that it gives you. Okay, so the next thing was to test this in 1440p with all of the ray tracing on and lighting on medium. And I had the DLSS on quality. And as you can see, I'm getting about 45 FPS driving around the city. Now, to be fair, TechDeals is using an ultra wide, so that explains why he was on medium detail and he was getting 45 FPS with pretty much similar settings. So if you're an ultra wide, so yeah, you're going to have to turn down your settings a little bit more. And that might include not having ray tracing on. Okay, let me give you my take on the RTX 3070 as it applies to myself. So I'm running a 1440p monitor. Now TechDeals is running an ultra wide 1440p, so maybe his perspective differs a little bit, but essentially I think you could run most games on 1440p ultra wide, except maybe for Cyberpunk 2077, which he's struggling with. Now I'll argue, is it really worth bothering about just for one game? And that's really up to you to decide, because there are going to be games that are going to be unoptimized. And Not an Apple Fan brings up a good point with Crysis. Even 4 or 5 years later, there are going to be games like Crysis where it's not going to run well, even on hardware like 4 or 5 years later. And Cyberpunk 2077 could be one of those cases, because if you just turn the ray tracing off, you get double the performance. So I think even with an RTX 60 series, you're not even going to play Cyberpunk 2077 that well, like 4 or 5 years later, because the ray tracing just kills the performance in this game. Now, this card also has other benefits. For example, it has less power usage than a 3080. So my 3070 is a Gigabyte model, Gigabyte 3070 gaming OC, and it has a power usage of 265 watts. I think typically it's about 220 or 230 watts for a 3070, so it goes over a little bit. But with the 3080, it's 320 watts, and the 3090 is 350 watts. Now they're way hotter, and I've had a 3090 in my system, and because I had it mining, you could hear the fans at night, and also it was very warm, so it could make the room very hot as well. So it's not a great thing if you're in a hot country like myself, but I think that's something else to consider as well. Like if you don't want all that heat in your room, well, the 3070 is also a good option and plays games really well. Now, one final point I want to make is the 8 gigabytes of VRAM on the RTX 3070. Now, I recently made a video a few days ago testing out the RTX 3070, the amount of VRAM on the card, and how much VRAM games actually use at the moment. And so after a lot of testing, I found that most games use like about 6 to 7 gigabytes of VRAM in 1440p and 4K, and I think 8 gigabytes is fine for this generation. After doing all the testing, there is a perception, oh look, games are starting to go over 8 gigabytes, but in terms of VRAM usage, I think they're not actually using more than the 8 gigabytes on the 3070. But going forward, I think NVIDIA is probably going to put out 40 series cards that are going to have higher VRAM amounts, maybe 12 gigabytes, maybe 16 gigabytes. And then maybe a year into that generation, then we'll start to see more games that have that require higher amounts of VRAM. But even still, when I looked at it in that video, my gut feeling was that you're probably going to have to drop your graphical settings anyways, because your performance isn't going to be up to scratch. So if you want to hit 60 FPS, you're probably going to have to drop your graphics settings, maybe down to medium. You're not going to hit that VRAM amount anyways. But anyway, that's my take on the 3070. Let me know what you think of the 3070. Do you think it's already obsolete? Or do you think it's still a really good graphics card? Let me know in the comments below. And if you like this video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you in the next one.